A pale dawn rises over the Louisiana Delta. The mist curls low across the cypress swamps, wrapping the old plantation house like a secret that refuses to die. They called it the Willows, a place of elegance and quiet horror. In the year 1841, a man named Henry Duval, planter, husband, father, sipped his morning coffee for the last time. The cup trembled in his hand. His breath came shallow. By sunset, his voice was gone. Within weeks, so was he. But his death wasn't sudden. It was a performance, methodical, unseen, and crafted by the very person who poured that coffee. What began as a quiet marriage in the golden heart of the South ended as one of the most disturbing chronicles in Louisiana's history. A story buried beneath charm, propriety, and the scent of roasted beans. And what if I told you? The real horror wasn't the poison itself, but the patience of the hand that delivered it. Before we step through the gates of the Willows, take a second. Hit subscribe if you live for stories that blur the line between beauty and brutality. Turn on the bell too, because the next few minutes will take you deep into a world where every sip meant surrender and every smile hid a secret. Now, settle in. The coffee's brewing, the candles are low, and the truth about Henry Duval is waiting. One cup at a time. The Louisiana dawn came slow, bleeding light through thick cypress fog that clung to the soil like a living thing. The Willows stood silent, its white columns glowing faintly against the humid breath of morning. Inside, Master Henry Duval stirred from uneasy sleep, the sound of footsteps echoing across old pine floors. Every corner of the house whispered history, male laughter from decades past, faded into the wood like perfume trapped in memory. The Willows was no ordinary plantation. It was a kingdom of discipline and quiet pride, ruled by men who measured worth not by wealth, but by endurance. Henry had inherited it at 26. His father, Charles Duval, had once said, "A man's power is the stillness in his decisions." Yet in the echo of that lesson, Henry found only restlessness. The house was full, but empty of fellowship. The world outside his gates grew colder. That winter of 1840, the rhythms of the Willows began to falter. The overseer, Thomas Gray, noticed small changes, delayed inspections, misplaced ledgers, coffee cooling on the desk before sunrise. Something beneath Henry's calm exterior was unraveling. Gray was a loyal man, broad-shouldered and silent. He'd worked under 2 generations of Duvals and carried their respect like a badge, but even he began to sense an unease thickening the air of the great hall. Each morning, Henry insisted on brewing his own coffee, a ritual his father once considered sacred. No servant touched the grinder, no hand but his measured the beans. Gray found this odd, yet dared not intrude. By mid-October, Henry's color had changed. His skin, once flushed with the healthy tone of the southern sun, had gone pale. His handshake weakened. His eyes seemed forever drawn toward some invisible point in the corner of the room. Still, the plantation thrived. Cotton wagons rolled down the dusty road toward Baton Rouge, the ledgers showed profit, and visitors still praised the Willows' order. But behind that facade, something unseen had begun to rot. The first sign came one gray morning when Henry dropped his cup. It shattered across the tiles, scattering coffee like spilled blood. Gray rushed forward, but Henry only muttered, "It's nothing. Just the chill." That night, alone in his study, Henry opened his father's journal. The ink had faded, but the words cut sharp. Strength is not loudness. It is control. He stared at the line until his eyes blurred. The next morning he brewed again. His hands trembled slightly as he lifted the cup, steam rising into the cold dawn air. He paused, staring into the surface as though waiting for it to speak. Outside, Gray watched from the veranda. He had known Henry since boyhood. To see him diminished now was like watching a monument crack in silence. He thought to speak, but something stopped him. At dinner, the men sat long at the table. conversation thin and formal. The air was heavy with politeness, but beneath it pulsed a tension too deep for words. Each man felt it. None dared name it. Henry spoke little that evening. His voice had softened, carrying none of the authority it once commanded. The others exchanged glances but carried on, the clinking of silverware the only rhythm that filled the silence. Weeks passed. Henry's body failed him slowly, with an almost deliberate cruelty, tremors in his fingers, fire in his stomach, a dizziness that struck him in quiet moments when the house was still. Gray summoned Dr. Thornton, a local physician known for his discretion. After a long examination, the doctor wrote in his ledger, "Patient shows signs of wasting, cause uncertain, recommends rest and reduced coffee intake." But Henry refused. "A man must not surrender his rituals," he said. Each dawn he brewed again, the grinder's rasp echoing like a confession through the cold hallways. By December, Gray began keeping his own notes. His loyalty demanded it. Master grows weaker, yet insists on command. Eyes hollow, speech distant, each entry darker than the last, each morning more unbearable. Then came January, frost on the shutters, the plantation asleep under a rare Louisiana chill. Henry no longer rode the fields. He stayed inside, confined to his chair, staring through the window as though watching ghosts. Gray visited often, bringing ledgers for signature. Henry's hand shook violently as he signed. The ink smeared across the paper like bruised blood. "The men still trust you," Gray said quietly. "That must count for something." Henry looked up. "Trust is not strength," he murmured. "It's habit." The words hung in the air like frost that refused to melt. For the first time, Gray feared his master. One stormy evening, lightning flashed over the cypress marsh. The entire house groaned beneath the wind. Gray heard movement in the kitchen, the unmistakable sound of grinding, though he knew Henry was bedridden upstairs. When he entered, the room was empty. Only the grinder spun faintly, its handle swaying as though someone had just released it. The smell of burnt coffee hung heavy, bitter as rust. Gray froze. For a moment, he thought he heard a whisper, soft, like breath against glass. Then silence. He stepped back, leaving the lamp burning behind him. That night, he slept with his door barred. In the following days, Henry worsened. He spoke little, ate less, drank only his coffee. His eyes wandered, unfocused, as though haunted by something no one else could see. Dr. Thornton returned, baffled by the deterioration. "His organs fail in unison," he wrote. "This is no fever. It is as though the body itself rebels against life." Yet no cause could be found. Gray stayed close. He refused to abandon his post. But each morning the grinder sang again, always just before dawn, always without witness. It became the heartbeat of the house, relentless and cruel. On February 10th, the doctor's final entry read simply, "Patient near death. Unnatural wasting." 2 days later, the willows fell silent. Henry Duval, last of his line, died before sunrise. Gray was the one who closed his eyes. He said nothing at the burial. The air was still, the soil wet. The grave swallowed its master without protest. For months after, Gray remained on the estate, tending the land alone. Yet some nights he swore he heard that same grinding echo through the dark. Always faint, always steady. Visitors spoke of strange smells in the corridors, coffee, though none was brewed. Some claimed to see shadows at dawn near the kitchen window, tall and still, as if waiting for a cup. Gray kept the keys to that room on his belt until the day he left the Willows for good. Before riding away, he looked back once, the mist swallowing the house whole. He never returned. But in the years that followed, men passing through the parish would tell the same story. Of a house where no servant stays, and where dawn still smells faintly of roasted beans. And in that scent, bitter, metallic, unending, lingered the memory of Henry Duval's final ritual, a man's strength eroded not by another's hand, but by something deeper, quieter, something that refused to die with him. The years after Henry Duval's death rolled through Louisiana like restless fog. The willows changed hands, but never spirit. Every man who entered its halls felt something watching, something male, breathing between the walls. By 1843, the plantation belonged to Jonathan Hale, a stoic merchant from Baton Rouge. He was a man of order, calculations, ledgers, and logic, but the house softened him. It whispered when he slept, called when he woke. Hale was 34, unmarried, a perfectionist who found solace in quiet mornings. He claimed no belief in spirits or curses, yet his coffee ritual began at dawn, in the same kitchen where Duval had died. The first time he heard the grinding, he thought it was wind through the eaves. The second time, he felt the handle twitch under his palm, spinning once before he touched it. His hands trembled afterward. By the third week, Hale could not begin his day without that sound, the rasping rhythm of metal teeth biting beans. It became part of him, as though the willows had folded his will into its own. The overseer, Samuel Raines, noticed his employer's decline. Hale's shoulders slumped, his skin lost warmth, and his eyes, once sharp, now flickered like candlelight behind glass. Yet every morning, that same cup returned to his lips. One night, Raines found Hale asleep at the desk, papers scattered, candle guttered low. A thin trail of black liquid had dried beside his hand, staining the wood. The air stank of scorched coffee. When Raines shook him awake, Hale murmured something unintelligible. One word repeated again and again. Henry. The name was unfamiliar to him, but it lingered in the dark, like a ghost refusing dismissal. He tried to dismiss it as fatigue. The following morning, Hale was back at the grinder, smiling faintly, as though the night before had never happened. "Sleep is for weaker men," he said softly. Raines kept his distance after that. He'd seen men worn down by grief or guilt, but this was different. Hale's decline carried the precision of a ritual, each tremor deliberate, each silence chosen. By late summer, Hale's condition had worsened. His weight dropped, his complexion grayed, and yet his mind seemed sharper, hungrier. He began writing in a leather journal, small notes written in meticulous script. "Strength is an illusion," one entry read. "Discipline reveals truth. The hand that grinds must never falter, even when it knows what waits in the cup." Raines found the page months later, hidden in a drawer. The men on the plantation whispered. They said the master walked the halls at night, talking to someone unseen. They claimed he never slept, that he spent his hours in the kitchen, grinding, brewing, staring into the cup. Raines confronted him once. "You're killing yourself, sir." Hale smiled thinly. "Perhaps," he said, "but at least I know the taste of it." That smile never reached his eyes. It was the smile of a man already gone. By October, Hale's hands had begun to shake uncontrollably. He wore gloves to hide it. He could no longer sign documents without Raines steadying the paper. Still, each dawn, the grinder turned. Always. Dr. Thornton returned, older now, but just as puzzled. "Identical symptoms," he muttered under his breath. "Just like Duval, the same trembling, the same decay." He prescribed tonics, prayers, rest. None of it mattered. The doctor left, shaken. He told Raines quietly, "If there's something in that coffee, destroy it." Raines nodded but never dared touch the grinder. Each time he approached, it seemed to hum faintly, like a warning. By winter, Hale had retreated entirely to the study. He rarely spoke, ate almost nothing, and drank only what he brewed himself. His beard grew wild, his eyes glassy with fevered purpose. Raines heard him one night speaking softly to the dark. "He was weak, Henry," Hale whispered. "You were weak, but I'll finish it. I'll see what you couldn't." His voice trembled with reverence and dread. A week later, Rains entered the study to find the grinder sitting on the desk beside Hale's journal. The cup beside it was half full, the surface still steaming. But Hale himself was gone. They searched the grounds for 3 days. On the 4th morning, his body surfaced in the river behind the property, half submerged, eyes open toward the sky. His mouth was stained black as tar. The coroner's report offered nothing useful. Cause of death? Indeterminate. But Rains knew. He locked the grinder in a chest and sealed it beneath the floorboards of the kitchen. He swore never to touch it again. Still, when the wind blew before dawn, he swore he could hear it turning, that dry metal whisper, rhythmic and steady, slicing through the silence like a heartbeat trapped beneath the earth. Years later, when Rains was old and gray, he told the story to his nephew, Matthew Clark. "Never let the willows choose you," he said. "The house doesn't want masters, it wants mirrors." Clark thought it was madness then, but after Rains' death, when he inherited the property, he found himself standing in the same kitchen, dust thick on the counters, and the faint smell of coffee still lingering. He found the chest easily. It was as if the floorboards remembered his uncle's fear. Inside lay the grinder, dark and cold, its handle motionless. Yet when he touched it, he swore he felt it breathe. That night he couldn't sleep. The sound began faintly, metal grinding stone. He rose, thinking it a dream, but the noise grew clearer. The smell of roasted beans drifted through the air, rich, bitter, familiar. In the moonlight, Clark saw the grinder moving on its own, slow and deliberate. He froze, the cup on the counter filled by unseen hands, steam rising like smoke from a gun barrel. And then, from somewhere deep in the walls, a voice, male, low and calm, spoke a single word that tasted like iron. "Drink." Clark backed away, heart pounding, but the cup slid toward him inch by inch. He turned and fled into the night, never looking back. The grinder spun once more, then stopped, as though satisfied. Outside, the fog rose thick and high, wrapping the willows in silence once again. From that night onward, no man stayed there long. The plantation decayed, the fields went barren, and the walls themselves seemed to exhale a memory of burnt coffee and dying strength. And if you stood close enough, just before dawn, you could still hear it. The slow, steady rasp of a grinder turning, powered by nothing but the weakness of men who refused to stop drinking. The Willows lay dormant for 20 years, its walls soaked in silence and memory. Men passed through like ghosts, each claiming they would restore its former glory, each leaving with fear in their eyes. By 1861, a war loomed across the South, and the plantation stood half abandoned. Its newest caretaker, Elias Boone, a former soldier-turned-steward, arrived with nothing but discipline and disbelief. He dismissed every whisper of curses. Boone was a man of reason, a veteran of battles that left him numb to superstition. Yet the moment he stepped into the kitchen, he smelled coffee, burnt, metallic, and unmistakably real. He ignored it. Weeks passed before he began hearing the grinder again, faint but deliberate, always just before dawn. He would rise from his cot, certain the sound was a dream, but it never stopped. The house seemed to breathe. Doors shifted in their frames, hinges whispered like teeth grinding in sleep. Boone took to patrolling the halls with a lantern, muttering to himself like a man refusing to pray. He found the grinder on his 10th night, cold, untouched, sealed within a chest beneath warped boards. His hands trembled as he reached for it, his reflection faint in the brass surface. The handle twitched once. Boone dropped it, heart pounding. "Steel settles," he whispered, forcing logic into fear. Yet the sound of grinding began again as he backed away, steady and deliberate, mocking his explanation. By morning, the aroma filled the kitchen, coffee, rich and wrong. He found a cup waiting on the counter, steam curling upward in a perfect spiral, untouched but expectant. He didn't drink. Instead, he poured it out onto the dirt outside, watching the liquid hiss against cold ground. But when he returned inside, the cup was full again. Days passed before he told anyone. The local blacksmith, George Hale, visited and laughed at Boone's nerves. The house creaks. Old wood, old pipes. He stayed that night to prove a point. By dawn, Hale was gone. His tools remained neatly arranged, his horse tied at the post. Boone found his footprints in the wet soil, leading to the river and ending abruptly at the bank. He sealed the kitchen door after that. No one entered again. The men in his employ prepared food outdoors, refusing to light fires within the house. Still, the smell of coffee persisted every morning. Letters from Boone during that winter survive. Stiff handwriting, ink blotted by trembling hands. There's something alive in this house, one reads. It doesn't want to haunt. It wants to continue. By spring, Boone began losing weight. His appetite vanished. His eyes sunk deep. It's the air, he insisted. Too heavy with moisture. But his voice cracked like brittle glass when he spoke. He started writing a new journal, a record of the phenomena. Each entry colder, more mechanical. The grinder operates without human contact. The sound recurs at dawn. The aroma follows. I resist drinking. Then an entry written weeks later in unsteady lines. I dreamt of a man. He offered me a cup and said, "Drink, and you'll understand why they stayed." I nearly obeyed. Rationality collapsed slowly. Boone's servants abandoned him one by one, leaving only silence and the faint metallic song that rose before sunrise. He wandered the halls barefoot, eyes wide, whispering numbers like prayers. On the final page of his journal, dated August 12, 1863, the handwriting changed, firmer, faster. The strength of a man is tested in resistance. I have resisted long enough. Tonight, I will know. When a traveler discovered the house months later, Boone was seated upright at the kitchen table. Before him, an empty cup. His lips blackened. His expression serene. The grinder was still warm. The authorities removed the body, buried it beside the others on the property. The journal was collected but later vanished from archives as if it refused to exist beyond those walls. Decades rolled forward. New owners came, all men of logic, commerce, ambition. The same pattern repeated: denial, intrigue, surrender. The Willows demanded its ritual, one man at a time. By 1899, a northern industrialist named Benjamin Crane purchased the land, intending to build a factory on its ruins. He laughed at stories of ghosts and poison, calling them Southern poetry. Crane slept soundly for weeks, until one morning when his workers found him sitting in the same chair Boone had died in, eyes open, cup in hand, steam rising from cold air. The coroner noted the smell of coffee but found no trace of liquid in the stomach. "A trick of the senses," he said. But those who carried the body swore they heard faint grinding from the floorboards. By the early 1900s, the Willows was abandoned again. Locals said the house no longer waited for new masters. It lured them. Men passing by would see a flicker in the kitchen window before dawn. Some said it was a lamp, others claimed it was reflection. But those who looked too long often fell ill, struck by nausea, trembling, and strange dreams of unseen hands turning an endless wheel. In 1912, a historian named Richard Morton documented the tale. "There is a pattern here," he wrote. "Men consumed by their own need for control. The poison isn't chemical, it's inheritance." He stayed 3 nights to observe. On the 3rd morning, townsmen found him wandering the road barefoot, muttering one word over and over: "Brew." His notes ended mid-sentence, pen snapped clean in half. The Willows decayed but never died. Rain stripped paint from its columns, vines strangled the veranda, yet the kitchen remained untouched, its walls dry, its scent forever unchanged. By 1930, a preservation crew arrived. Among them was Thomas Reed, a quiet architect who dismissed all legends. "We rebuild history," he said, "not superstition." But the Willows had other plans. Reed worked tirelessly, restoring beams and staircases. But as the days passed, he grew pale, irritable. Workers said he spent nights sitting by the cold stove, staring at the empty counter. When they found him weeks later, he was asleep upright, head tilted toward the grinder. A faint smile rested on his face, as though he had finally joined a conversation only he could hear. After his death, the crew sealed the kitchen again. Yet the grinder remained untouched. No one dared move it. Its shadow lengthened across the wall with the dawn light, turning slowly, silently, endlessly. And as the years faded into dust, the men who remembered spoke of the Willows not as haunted, but alive. A thing that tested every man's strength the same way, with a cup, a scent, and silence. By 1952, the Willows stood against time like a scar refusing to fade. Its walls cracked, its fields swallowed by vines, but the air still carried that same faint bitterness of burned coffee. The new owner, Jonathan Mercer, was a historian from New Orleans, a man of facts, measurements, and restless curiosity. He bought the Willows not for profit, but to disprove the stories that had haunted generations. He arrived with notebooks and confidence, dismissing every warning. "A house doesn't remember," he told the caretaker. "Men do." Yet when night fell, he heard the first whisper of grinding beneath the floorboards. It was faint, rhythmic, almost gentle. He told himself it was rats, wind, or wood shifting under humidity. But the next morning, the kitchen smelled faintly of roasted beans, fresh, impossible, and inviting. Mercer wrote it down. Sensory suggestion caused by expectation. His logic was armor, and he wore it proudly. Yet with each entry his handwriting trembled more, the words slanting as if written by an uncertain hand. On the seventh night, the sound grew louder, metal on stone, deliberate and steady. Mercer followed it down the hall, lantern trembling in his grip. The air thickened with warmth, the faint hiss of boiling water. The kitchen was empty, but on the table sat a single cup, steam rising lazily in the dark. He leaned close. The surface of the coffee rippled, though the air was still. He didn't drink. He simply watched until the steam thinned into nothing, then turned away. Yet when he returned to his room, his throat felt coated in bitterness, as though he had swallowed something unseen. Sleep became impossible. He heard the grinder each night, steady, patient, never faltering. During the day, he cataloged documents about the Willows, each owner's death eerily similar, each ending in the same room. Mercer found records of Henry Duval, Jonathan Hale, Elias Boone, all men of discipline, each undone by ritual. The inked reports grew more erratic as they continued, the words, "the cup," repeating until the letters dissolved. By the third week, Mercer stopped eating. Coffee alone sustained him, brewed from beans he swore he hadn't purchased. The servants left, unwilling to stay after hearing the grinder's metallic pulse before dawn. He remained. He told himself he was studying the phenomenon, but somewhere in his notes, between observations and denials, a single line appeared again and again. "It wants us to understand." Visitors noticed the change. His voice weakened, his hands shook. He laughed at nothing. When asked about the grinder, he'd reply, "It's not cursed, it's curious. It only wants company." One stormy morning, Mercer vanished. The door to the kitchen was locked from the inside. When broken open, the lanterns flickered to reveal him seated at the table, cup in hand, eyes open and calm. The coffee was gone, evaporated or absorbed, no one knew. The grinder was still warm, though no one had touched it. His journals ended with a single unfinished line. The house drinks too. Years passed. The Willows changed owners again and again, each man convinced he could outsmart whatever lingered there. Each left quickly, whispering of whispers, of footsteps, of steam where none should be. In 1971, the estate fell to a professor named Daniel Cross. He specialized in human psychology, fascinated by the power of belief. To him, the Willows was not haunted, it was the perfect experiment. He brought instruments, sensors, and recording devices, determined to prove the legends false. His assistants, all men of science, slept in shifts, tracking temperature, movement, and sound. The grinder remained still for 3 nights. On the 4th, the air thickened. One assistant, Andrew Holt, awoke gasping, his skin clammy. The scent of coffee filled the room, though the pot was cold. In the distance, the grinder began turning. They rushed to the kitchen. The machines malfunctioned, recordings filled with static. The grinder spun on its own, slow, deliberate, its rhythm impossibly human. Holt reached out to stop it and screamed. He collapsed instantly. His pulse remained, but his eyes stared blankly. When he spoke hours later, his words were disjointed. It asked why we left it alone, he whispered, tears streaking his cheeks. Cross documented everything. He grew obsessed, convinced the entity was not malevolent but mechanical, an echo of men repeating a pattern of failure. It feeds on order, he wrote. It copies us until we vanish. Weeks later, Cross stopped writing. The recordings ceased. The other men fled, reporting faint sounds of grinding that followed them for miles down the river road. None ever returned. Local authorities found the house empty except for Cross's belongings. His last note lay beside the grinder. The pattern is complete. It no longer needs hands. After that, the grinder moved no more. The Willows fell into silence, its walls heavy with history. But even silence can remember, and memory can move in strange, imperceptible ways. In 1995, a restoration team arrived. 5 men rebuilding the forgotten plantation for tourism. They laughed at the stories, drank beer on the porch, and joked about ghosts with trembling smiles. The first week was easy. The second brought cold mornings and sleepless nights. By the third, one of them, Michael Green, heard the grinder again. He told no one, but his eyes betrayed him. He began waking before dawn, standing in the kitchen doorway, whispering to something unseen. "I know what you want," he said once, and the others laughed nervously. But the next morning he was gone. Only footprints remained, wet, leading toward the well. The men sealed the property and fled. The project died like every dream built on that cursed foundation. Now, the Willows stands behind locked gates, hidden under layers of moss and myth. No lights shine within, no voices rise, only the faintest echo of grinding before the dawn. Local men still speak of it in hushed tones. They say the sound travels with the river mist, following any who dare listen too long. Each year, someone claims to hear it again, and sometimes just before sunrise, when the air is still and heavy, a faint aroma drifts across the fields, coffee, sharp and metallic. Some men stop breathing when they smell it. Others follow it home. They say it isn't haunted. They say it isn't cursed. They say the Willows is simply patient. It waits for men certain they are strong enough to drink without trembling, and when they do, the grinder turns again. Slow, gentle, eternal.